Zane stood alone, staring out over the icy, barren landscape of the planet Zernax. It was a quiet world, far removed from Earth, and even farther from the hustle and bustle of civilization. The cold here could freeze your bones within minutes, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the loneliness. As a soldier stationed on a remote diplomatic mission, Zane had been isolated for months. He had grown used to the silence, the stillness, but it was starting to wear on him. He'd heard stories about mail-order brides, women from other planets who were matched with lonely humans on distant worlds. Zane wasn't expecting much. In fact, he had ordered one out of a mix of curiosity and desperation. It wasn't like he could just fly to Earth and meet someone in person, not with his mission tying him down. The idea of having someone, anyone, around to talk to share the quiet with, seemed like a dream come true. But when the message arrived and the shuttle landed, he felt a strange mixture of excitement and fear. The ship's engines cut out, and the cold wind howled across the open landscape as the shuttle doors slowly creaked open. Out stepped Elira, a tall alien woman with skin as pale as the frozen landscape around them. Her eyes, glowing a faint, unnatural shade of blue, looked cold, distant, and unreadable. Zane's heart raced as he stepped forward to greet her. "Welcome to Zernax," he said, trying to sound friendly. But Elira didn't respond. She didn't even acknowledge his presence, her gaze fixed solely on the ground as she stepped off the shuttle. There was an eerie silence about her, something that sent a chill through Zane that had nothing to do with the cold air around them. She was beautiful, there was no doubt about that. Her features were elegant, almost otherworldly, but there was something off about her. Zane had been expecting a woman to share his company, but instead, it felt like he was welcoming a stranger. Her body language screamed, "Don't come near me." The longer he stood there, the more the coldness in the air seemed to deepen. Elira carried a large, strange box with her, wrapped in a thick, protective material that shimmered with faint pulses of light. It wasn't an ordinary box. It looked ancient, like it came from a different era, or even a different galaxy. Zane couldn't help but stare at it, the odd, pulsating glow drawing him in. There was something about the box that felt important, but she wasn't saying a word. "Is everything okay?" Zane asked, feeling awkward now. He wasn't sure if he was talking to her or to the mysterious box she was clutching. Elira barely turned to look at him, her face still cold and expressionless. "I'm fine," she said in a low, steady voice that seemed to carry an edge to it, as if she were saying those words to herself more than to him. Zane didn't know what to make of her. She was here now, but the woman he had imagined, the one he'd seen in the brief video communications, was nothing like this, silent, distant, and carrying an air of mystery that Zane couldn't quite shake. As the evening drew closer, the temperature on the planet dropped even further, and the wind picked up. Zane led Elira into the shelter he had set up, a small, insulated home designed for one. It wasn't luxurious, but it was functional. He had prepared a small meal, hoping to ease the tension, but Elira didn't seem interested. Without a word, she sat down at the small table and placed the box in front of her. She didn't eat or drink anything. Instead, she simply stared at the box with a deep intensity. Zane couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own home. She was here, but she wasn't really here. He couldn't stand the silence any longer. "I know this is probably a lot to take in," he said, trying his best to make her feel comfortable. "But you're safe now. You're not alone." He was speaking from the heart, but he wasn't sure if she was even listening. Elira slowly turned to look at him. Her eyes seemed to pierce right through him, as though she was evaluating him, trying to decide if he was trustworthy or not. She seemed so distant, so closed off. Zane couldn't figure her out. Was she angry? Sad? Did she even want to be here? "I didn't ask to be here," she finally said, her voice low but steady. The words were a whisper, but they carried an unmistakable weight. Zane didn't know if she meant it for him or just as a statement to the universe, but it struck him deeply. He wanted to say something, anything, to make her feel better. But the words didn't come. Instead, he found himself staring at the box. It was like it held the key to understanding her. There was an undeniable pull to it, something about its strange, glowing surface. But Elira wouldn't talk about it. She only seemed to grow more closed off with every passing moment. Zane spent the rest of the evening sitting in silence, trying to make sense of what was happening. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Elira's arrival than he was being told. The box, the coldness, the way she refused to even look at him, it was all so strange. But one thing was clear. She wasn't the woman he'd expected. She was a mystery, and Zane was determined to unravel it. As he lay down to sleep, he couldn't help but wonder what secrets Elira was hiding. What was inside the box? And why did she seem so determined to keep it? And herself, locked away from the world. Zane couldn't shake the feeling that he was in the middle of something much bigger than he had realized. And whatever it was about to change everything. The next few days on Zernax were cold, as expected, but even the freezing temperatures couldn't mask the growing sense of unease that followed Zane and Elira. Zane had never been one to pry into others' affairs, but something about the way Elira clutched the box so tightly, never letting it out of her sight, made him curious. He couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a simple piece of luggage or a forgotten personal belonging. It was something much more important, something that had to do with Elira's past. Every evening, Zane tried to strike up conversation with her, but Elira remained quiet, often retreating into her own world, her eyes fixed on the box. She never opened it, never spoke about it, and yet it was clear that it was important to her, more than anything else in the room. Zane, despite his training and discipline, found it difficult to ignore the pull of mystery surrounding her and the box. On the fourth day, Zane couldn't take it any longer. He needed to know what was in the box. He found Elira in the same spot she always sat, her eyes glazed, as if lost in thought. The box was in front of her on the table, glowing faintly in the dim light of their shelter. Zane sat down opposite her, his heart pounding in his chest. He was never one to force his way into others' personal space, but something about this situation told him he needed to understand. Elira, I want to help, Zane said carefully, trying to sound as nonchalant as possible. I know you've been through a lot. I'm here to make sure you're safe, but there's something about that box. I need to know what it is. Maybe if I understand it, I can help you. Elira didn't respond right away. Her eyes remained locked on the box as though contemplating whether or not to trust him. Finally, she took a deep breath and spoke. It's not what you think, she murmured. Her voice was quiet, but there was a hint of something. Fear, perhaps, in her tone. This box holds everything I've ever known, everything I've ever been taught to believe. It's a symbol of my people, of their power. But it's also a prison. Zane leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. A prison? He had no idea what she meant, but he could tell that there was a deeper meaning to her words. She continued, her eyes not meeting his. My people are not like yours. We were once a powerful civilization, but we gave up our emotions to achieve greater knowledge. We thought we were becoming better, but all we did was grow cold. Now we have nothing. This box, this artifact, is the last piece of our past, the key to everything we once were. Zane sat back, processing her words. A civilization that had given up emotions. That sounded like madness to him. He'd seen enough of life to know that emotions, while often messy and complicated, were what made life worth living. Without them, what was there? The more he thought about it, the more he understood the depths of Elira's pain. She wasn't just isolated in this cold, frozen world. She was isolated from herself. And the box? Zane asked gently, hoping to learn more. Elira finally looked up at him, her blue eyes shimmering in the low light. The box holds a crystal, she said. It's the last of its kind, a powerful energy source. It's said to have the ability to bond two beings together, to merge their minds, to understand each other in ways that words could never describe. But it also has the power to break them, to destroy them if they're not ready. I've been carrying it for years, but I haven't dared to open it. Zane was stunned. The idea of a crystal that could bond two beings together was unlike anything he'd ever heard of. He didn't know what to think. Was this some sort of ancient technology? Or was it something more? Something that could change everything between him and Elira. I don't know how it works, Elira added quietly. But I've been told that once it's opened, once it activates, there's no going back. It will change everything. Zane couldn't help but feel a growing sense of responsibility. He wasn't just dealing with an alien woman from another world. He was dealing with a woman who carried a power that could reshape their lives and the course of their futures. But what was she afraid of? Why hadn't she opened the box? What was she hiding? He decided to press her further. Elira, if it's so important, why haven't you opened it yet? If this crystal is so powerful, why not use it too? Because it's dangerous, she interrupted, her voice sharp now. My people believe that emotions are a weakness. They told me that once the crystal is activated, it will bond me with a human. And that's what I fear. I was trained to resist emotions, but the crystal doesn't care. It will show me a side of myself I've spent my whole life suppressing. I fear what I'll become if I open it. I fear that I'll lose control. Zane watched her carefully, his heart going out to her. He could see the internal battle raging within her. She was afraid, not just of the power of the crystal, but of what it might make her feel. It wasn't just the fear of change, it was the fear of becoming something she didn't understand, something she had been taught to reject. I'm not asking you to open it right now, Zane said softly, trying to reassure her. But if you ever do, I'll be here. I'll help you. You don't have to face this alone. Elira's eyes softened for a moment, and for the first time, Zane saw a flicker of emotion, a hint of hope. It was fleeting, but it was there. I don't know if I'm ready, she whispered, but maybe one day. Zane nodded, understanding her fear. But he knew something that she didn't. Opening that box might be the key to unlocking more than just her past. It might be the key to saving both of them. The mystery of the box and its power lingered in the air between them, and as the days went by, Zane knew one thing for sure. Whatever was inside that box, it would change everything. The days on Zernax continued to drag on, the cold unrelenting as ever. Zane and Elira, though still distant, began to develop a strange kind of understanding. It wasn't much, but it was something. Zane couldn't deny that he felt a connection to her, a connection that was more than just duty. Her presence had slowly become less of an enigma, and more of a mystery he wanted to solve. Every morning, he'd offer her food, hoping to break the silence, and every evening, they would sit together, with her still clutching that strange box. He had grown used to the fact that she wouldn't talk much, but the way she looked at the box, sometimes with longing, other times with fear, made him wonder what was truly inside it. What could be so powerful that it had her so terrified? Zane's curiosity was growing, but he also understood that Elira wasn't ready to open up fully. He didn't push her, though, respecting the boundaries she had set. Despite her cold exterior, there were moments when she would show a flicker of emotion. When he shared a story of Earth, or when he made her laugh with one of his attempts at humor, her eyes would soften, and a tiny smile would play on her lips. Still, the silence between them could be stifling. Zane felt like he was walking on thin ice, always careful with what he said, unsure of how she would respond. But as the days passed, something seemed to change. Slowly, Elira started to trust him more. She would talk about her past, not in great detail, but enough to make Zane realize that she wasn't as distant as she had appeared at first. One evening, after a particularly quiet day, Elira surprised him. She spoke softly, almost hesitantly, as though weighing each word carefully. I never asked for this life, she said, staring out the small window that overlooked the icy wasteland of Zernax. "I was born into a society where emotions were seen as weakness. Our people believed that logic and reason were the only true paths to enlightenment. We sacrificed everything, our happiness, our desires, just for knowledge. And for what? Power. Control." Zane listened intently, sensing the weight of her words. He had always believed in the power of emotion, in the strength it gave people to fight, to live. It was clear now that Elira's people had taken a very different approach. "There are things I regret," she continued, her voice a little shakier now. "Things I can't undo. And that box, it's a reminder of everything I've lost." Zane didn't know what to say, so he stayed quiet, allowing her to speak freely for the first time. Her vulnerability made her more human in his eyes, and he couldn't help but feel protective of her, as if the box wasn't the only thing she needed help with. The next day, something unexpected happened. The ground shook beneath their shelter, a violent tremor that sent both of them to the floor. Zane's instincts kicked in immediately, and he rushed to the door, scanning the horizon. It didn't take long to see the signs. In the distance, the sky was streaked with the orange glow of enemy ships entering the atmosphere. Alien ships, and they were heading straight for them. Zane's heart raced. He had been trained for combat, but he hadn't expected to face such a threat so soon. The aliens coming toward them weren't from Zernax. They were from a neighboring planet, and they had a reputation for being ruthless. They were known as the Tarak, a highly advanced species with weapons capable of decimating entire cities with a single strike. Elira, who had been standing behind him, suddenly spoke, her voice low and filled with fear. "They've come for the box," she whispered. "They know it's here." Zane turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief. "What do you mean? Who are they? Why would they want the box?" Elira's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of anger and fear. "The Tarak are mercenaries. They're after the power that's in the crystal. They'll do anything to get it. If they open it, they'll use it to control entire systems. They can force it to bond with anyone, manipulate emotions, turn people into weapons." Zane's blood ran cold. The crystal inside the box could give the Tarak unimaginable power, something no one could stand against. He knew they had to act quickly. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice urgent. Elira was already moving toward the box, her hands trembling as she picked it up. She looked at Zane with a grim expression. "I've trained for years to prevent this, but it's too late now. They're already here. We need to leave, and we need to do it fast." Zane nodded, grabbing his weapon and preparing for a fight. He had faced tough situations before, but this felt different. The stakes were higher now, not just for him, but for Elira and the fate of the entire galaxy. They quickly gathered what little they could carry, and Elira led him to a hidden underground passage that would take them away from the shelter. Zane had never seen it before, but it was clear Elira had prepared for moments like this. As they moved through the tunnels, the sounds of explosions and laser fire echoed in the distance, a reminder of the danger they were facing. The Tarak were relentless, and they had technology far superior to anything Zane had ever seen. But Elira wasn't just any ordinary ally. She was a warrior, trained in ways that Zane couldn't even begin to comprehend. Together, they navigated the treacherous tunnels, keeping their movements silent and quick. Zane couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as Elira led them. She wasn't just protecting the box, she was protecting him. And as they moved deeper into the underground, Zane realized something. He wasn't just protecting her anymore, either. They were in this together. As they emerged into the open, Zane glanced back at the shelter, now consumed by smoke and fire. The Tarak were closing in. But Elira held the box tightly, and with that, he knew they had a chance to survive. They would fight. Together. Whatever it took. The sound of footsteps echoed through the darkened tunnels as Zane and Elira moved cautiously toward an unknown destination. The chaos outside had been overwhelming, with blasts and tremors rattling the ground, but they had managed to slip away from the Tsarek, at least for the moment. Zane couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. He had faced countless dangers before, but this felt different. The Tsarek were relentless, and their pursuit of Elira's box made Zane question everything he had known about the situation. There was something more to that box, something far beyond what Elira had told him. He knew that once they were safe, he would need to understand the full extent of its power, before it was too late. Elira walked beside him, her expression unreadable. She held the box tightly in her arms, her fingers gently caressing the surface as if she were trying to connect with it on a deeper level. It wasn't the first time she had acted this way, but there was a new urgency in her movements. Zane could see the stress written on her face, the fear that she was trying to hide. "How much farther?" Zane asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning the shadows ahead. "Not far," Elira replied, her voice calm but strained. "There's a place. An old temple, hidden deep in the mountains. It's the only place where we can hide and figure out what to do next." The further they traveled, the more oppressive the silence became. The sounds of war were far behind them now, but the tension hung thick in the air. Zane could feel it, a deep, gnawing uncertainty. They had escaped the immediate danger, but Zane knew that this was only the beginning. The Tsarek wouldn't give up so easily, especially once they realized that Elira and the box had vanished. After what seemed like hours, they reached the base of the mountains. The temple Elira had spoken of was a hidden ruin, buried beneath layers of snow and rock. It wasn't much to look at, just a series of ancient stone walls with symbols Zane couldn't read, but it was safe for the moment. Elira led the way inside, her eyes flicking nervously over her shoulder. She didn't speak, but Zane could see the weight of her thoughts. She was conflicted, torn between the necessity of hiding and the fear of what might happen once the box was opened. Once inside, they found a small, secluded chamber. The air was cold, but it felt safer here. Elira lowered the box onto a stone pedestal in the center of the room and stepped back. She was trembling now, but Zane could see the determination in her eyes. "This is it," she said quietly. "We can't keep running forever. I need to know what's inside. I need to know what it wants from me." Zane nodded. He understood. The box had always been a mystery, a symbol of power, and now it was time to unlock its secrets. He had a feeling that whatever was inside would change everything. Elira took a deep breath, and for the first time, Zane saw her hesitate. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the surface of the box, muttering something under her breath. Zane watched in silence, his heart pounding in his chest. What was she doing? What was she about to reveal? Suddenly, the box began to glow. At first, it was faint, a soft blue light that pulsed in time with Elira's breathing. But then the glow grew brighter, and the air around them seemed to hum with energy. Zane took a step back, instinctively reaching for his weapon. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew that it wasn't good. The power emanating from the box was unlike anything he had ever felt. It felt ancient, alive. The glow intensified, and then, with a soft click, the box opened. Zane's breath caught in his throat. Inside was a crystal, clear, almost glowing, with veins of gold running through it. The crystal pulsed with energy, and Zane could feel it deep in his chest, as though it was calling out to him. Elira reached out slowly, her hands trembling as she touched the crystal. As her fingers brushed against it, a shockwave of energy rippled through the room. Zane staggered backward, his head spinning as the air became thick with power. The crystal seemed to respond to Elira, as if it recognized her. Her face paled, and she gasped, her eyes widening in shock. "No," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. "It's not. It can't be." Zane didn't understand what was happening, but he could see the fear in her eyes. The crystal was reacting to her, perhaps to something deep inside her that even she didn't fully understand. He took a step forward, unsure whether he should approach or stay back. Ylira was frozen, her hand still on the crystal, her entire body shaking. "What is it, Ylira?" Zane asked softly, his voice steady despite the panic rising inside him. "What's happening?" She turned to him, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. "This crystal, it's a bond," she whispered. "It's meant to bond two beings, mind and body, to merge their thoughts, their emotions, everything. It's the power I've been running from all these years." Zane's mind raced. A bond. He had heard of such things. Ancient rituals, merging of minds, but he had never encountered anything like this. He couldn't understand why Ylira was so afraid. But as the crystal pulsed brighter, he began to realize. This wasn't just any bond. This was something far deeper, something that could change everything between them. Ylira's eyes filled with tears. "It's happening. It's bonding with me." Zane's heart pounded in his chest. "What does that mean for you?" Ylira's voice faltered as she spoke. "It means I can never be the same again. The emotions I've suppressed for so long, they'll flood me. I'll be forced to feel everything. I'll feel a bond, our connection, forever." Zane stepped forward, his hand reaching out to hers. "Then we'll face it together," he said, his voice firm with resolve. "Whatever this bond means, we'll deal with it together." Ylira met his gaze, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt, but she didn't find any. Slowly, she nodded, and as her fingers touched his, the crystal flashed one last time. And then, everything went silent. The room was still, but the bond had been formed. And whatever lay ahead for them, Zane knew one thing. They were no longer just two people running from their past. They were something more. They were bound together by the power of the crystal, and whatever threats lay in their path, they would face them together. The silence in the temple was deafening. After the crystal had bonded with Ylira, everything had changed. Zane could still feel the weight of the energy in the air, the subtle pulse of the bond between them that now connected their thoughts and emotions. It was like a thread, invisible yet undeniable, tying them together. Ylira sat motionless, her hands still resting on the pedestal where the box had been. Her eyes were closed, her face pale, as if she were listening to something only she could hear. The crystal was no longer glowing, but Zane could sense the power it held. It was like a quiet storm, waiting for something, or someone, to trigger it. Zane had never seen her like this. She was no longer the cold, distant warrior he had first met. Something inside her had shifted, and although she seemed more fragile, he could also feel a new strength radiating from her. It was the strength of the bond they had formed, a bond that wasn't just physical but emotional as well. He stood nearby, unsure of what to do. He had seen Ylira face many dangers, but this was different. The crystal had changed her, and now they were both in uncharted territory. He knew that Sarak were still out there, hunting them, and their next move could be the last. Zane had fought in battles before, but this was something more than just another fight. It felt like the final confrontation, the moment when everything would be decided. Ylira finally opened her eyes, and when she looked at Zane, her gaze was full of emotions that she had never allowed herself to express before. The bond between them seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. "It's time," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly. "They're coming. They won't stop until they have the crystal." Zane nodded, his jaw tightening with resolve. He could already hear the faint hum of enemy ships in the distance. The Sarak were closing in, and their weapons were more advanced than anything he or Ylira could defend against. But now, with the crystal, they had something that Sarak wanted desperately. And it wasn't just the crystal they were after. It was the power to control entire systems, to bend entire civilizations to their will. They had already killed so many, and now it was time to put an end to their reign of terror. "We need to make a plan," Zane said, his voice low and steady. He wasn't about to let them win. Not when they were so close to the truth. "We have the crystal. but we need to use it. It's our only chance." Ylaira shook her head. "It's not that simple. The crystal is powerful, yes, but it's also unpredictable. I've seen its power before, used in ways I wish I could forget. It bonds with the user, amplifies their abilities, but at a price. The bond is permanent, and once you're bonded, there's no turning back." Zane felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The crystal's power sounded dangerous, but Ylaira's words made it clear that they had no choice. If they were to survive, they would have to embrace that power, no matter the cost. "We'll figure it out," Zane said, more to himself than to Ylaira. "We'll use it, and we'll win. We have no other option." Ylaira stood up, her expression hardening as she took the crystal from the pedestal. She held it in her hands, her fingers lightly tracing the gold veins that ran through it. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought, her mind far away. But then, her gaze returned to Zane, and there was a fire in her eyes. "I'm not afraid of what it can do to me," she said, her voice full of quiet determination. "But I need you to be ready, Zane. The crystal will change you too. You'll feel everything I feel, see everything I see. Our bond will grow stronger, but so will the danger." Zane nodded. He had always known this wasn't going to be easy. The moment he had decided to protect Ylaira and the box, he had signed up for a war he didn't fully understand. But now, it was clear, this wasn't just about surviving. This was about stopping the Tsarak from taking control of everything, from destroying what was left of Ylaira's people, and making sure their power never reached anyone else. The thought of the Tsarak struck fear in Zane's heart. They had faced down entire armies before, but the Tsarak were different. They didn't just fight, they obliterated. The energy in their weapons, the brutality of their tactics, the sheer scale of their technology, it was overwhelming. But now, with the crystal, Zane knew they could turn the tide. "We'll need a distraction," Zane said, thinking quickly. "Something big to draw their attention while we get into position." Ylaira gave him a sharp look. "And what do you suggest? We're not dealing with just any enemy. The Tsarak won't be fooled by a simple trick." Zane smiled grimly. "No, but we've got something they don't expect. A human with a plan. If we play it smart, we can lead them right into a trap." Ylaira was silent for a moment before nodding. "I trust you. But you have to understand, once we go forward with this, there's no turning back. If we fail, the crystal could end up in their hands. And if that happens," Zane finished her thought, "then we've lost everything." He didn't need to say anything more. Ylaira knew, and he knew. The stakes couldn't be higher. It was no longer just about them. It was about the survival of entire civilizations, about preventing the Tsarak from bringing their reign of terror to the rest of the galaxy. They began preparing for the final confrontation. Zane checked his weapons, ensuring every tool was in place. Ylaira, despite her hesitation, was focused and determined. She had become more than just a woman he was trying to protect. She had become his partner, his ally in a fight that would change the course of history. The crystal, with all its power, was the key. But Zane knew that it was their combined strength, their connection, that would truly give them the edge. As the minutes ticked by, the air grew heavier with anticipation. They had a plan, a fragile hope that it would work, but the reality was that the Tsarak were closing in fast. There was no room for error. Everything they had done, everything they had sacrificed, had led to this moment. And now, as the distant hum of enemy ships grew louder, Zane and Ylaira shared one last look, a look that spoke volumes of their trust, their fear, and their resolve. This was it. The final battle was upon them. And whatever the outcome, they would face it together. The sky was dark, with streaks of light cutting through the clouds as enemy ships descended onto the battlefield. The ground beneath Zane's boots shook with the force of their arrival, the air thick with tension. This was it, the final moment, the one that would decide the fate of everything. Zane could feel the crystal's energy pulsing from where it rested in Lyra's hand, its glow faint but constant. She was standing beside him, her expression one of quiet determination. The crystal, their last hope, had bonded with both of them. It had made them stronger, faster, more connected. But it had also made them more vulnerable, for the power it gave was not without its dangers. Yet there was no turning back now. "Are you ready?" Zane asked, his voice steady, though his heart raced with anticipation. Ylira looked at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "We don't have a choice. We fight, or we lose everything." Zane nodded. He knew that. The Tsarak were ruthless, their weapons far more advanced than anything he had ever seen. But now, they had the crystal. Now, they had the power to change the course of this battle. Together, they could stand against the enemy, and with luck, win. As the enemy ships grew closer, Zane adjusted his grip on his weapon, feeling the weight of it in his hands. Every move, every decision, would have consequences. But this was no longer just about survival. This was about justice. This was about stopping the Tsarak from dominating and destroying the lives of countless others. The first wave of Tsarak soldiers landed with a roar, their massive armored figures stepping down from their ships. They were everything Zane had expected: cold, calculating, and terrifying. Their weapons hummed with deadly energy, and the ground crackled with the intensity of their technology. But Zane was ready. He had to be. Beside him, Ylira stepped forward, her body a perfect mix of grace and power. The crystal pulsed with energy, and she raised her hand, calling upon its power. A blue light flickered around her, forming a protective shield. Zane felt the power of the bond between them grow stronger, their emotions entwined as they moved together like a well-practiced team. The first Tsarak soldier lunged toward them, its weapon raised high. Zane acted without thinking, darting forward and delivering a well-placed blow to the soldier's chest. The force of the strike sent the soldier stumbling back, but it didn't fall. It raised its weapon again, ready to fire. But before it could react, Ylira was there. With a swift movement, she slammed the Tsarak soldier to the ground, the crystal's energy channeling through her in a powerful surge. The soldier crumpled, its weapon falling to the ground. It was over before it had even begun. Zane and Ylira moved as one, a perfect duo. Their movements synchronized. Each step they took, each strike they delivered, was calculated and precise. The Tsarak were strong, but they were no match for the bond that had formed between Zane and Ylira. The crystal had given them strength, yes, but it was their trust in each other that made them unstoppable. As the battle raged on, Zane could see the Tsarak forces falling back, their confidence starting to waver. They hadn't anticipated this. They hadn't anticipated the human spirit. They hadn't understood what it meant to fight for something greater than survival. The Tsarak had only ever known power and control, but Zane and Ylira knew something more: love, hope, and determination. Despite the growing victory, the battle was far from over. More and more Tsarak soldiers poured onto the battlefield, their numbers overwhelming. Zane could feel the strain on his body as he fought, the exhaustion creeping into his limbs. But every time he thought he couldn't go on, he felt Ylira's presence beside him, the strength of their bond fueling him to push forward. Then, from the chaos, came the sound of something much worse: the Tsarak warship. Zane's heart skipped a beat. The warship was massive, its dark silhouette looming in the sky. It had been waiting, hovering in the distance, and now it was making its descent. Its weapons hummed with power, ready to obliterate everything in its path. If they didn't stop it, this battle would be lost. Ylira turned to him, her eyes wide with realization. "We have to stop it now. The crystal, it can." Before she could finish, the warship unleashed its first blast. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air was filled with the sound of destruction. The energy beam tore through the ground, sending debris flying in every direction. The Tsarak had come prepared to destroy, not just defeat. Zane's pulse quickened. The crystal's power surged within him, and he could feel the connection between him and Elira growing stronger, more intense. He didn't know how much time they had, but he knew they had to act quickly. Together, they raised their hands, and the crystal's energy flared to life, a brilliant blue light enveloping them. The ground beneath their feet began to crack as the energy surged, pushing back against the incoming attack. Zane could feel the power of the crystal in every fiber of his being. It was like a wave crashing over him, forcing him to focus every ounce of strength he had. With a powerful push, the energy shot from the crystal, streaking toward the warship. The beam collided with the massive ship's hull, and for a moment, time seemed to slow. The warship shuddered, the energy from the crystal tearing through its shields and striking deep into its core. Zane and Elira's hands shook as the beam continued to push, the crystal's power feeding their strength. The warship was finally breaking apart, its systems failing under the onslaught. The Tsarek had underestimated them. They had underestimated the strength of the human spirit, the power of love and hope, and the bond that had been forged between Zane and Elira. With a final explosion, the warship crumbled, falling to the ground in a fiery wreck. The battlefield fell silent. Zane collapsed to his knees, his body drained from the effort. Elira, too, was breathing heavily beside him. They had done it. They had won. The Tsarak were defeated, and the galaxy was safe. For now. Elira turned to him, her eyes filled with emotion. "We did it, Zane. We really did it." Zane looked at her, a smile breaking through his exhaustion. Together. We did it together. And in that moment, with the enemy defeated and the crystal's power slowly fading, they knew that their bond would never be broken. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning.